Then I heard it, a low, steady hum, rising slowly into audibility. Not from the highway, not from the power lines. It seemed to come from above, from inside the stillness itself. I moved to the back window and peered toward the tree line. Through the gaps in the branches, lightning still flickered in the east. But above the woods behind my house, the air shimmered, a heat distortion ripple hanging at treetop level, pulsing once, just once, like a slow heartbeat. Then the rain returned, hard and immediate, as if a valve had been opened. And moments later, the thunder finally came back, so loud and so close that the dishes rattled in my cabinets and I lurched backward from the window. I didn't go near that window again for the rest of the night. The power went out around midnight. I sat in the dark for half an hour, listening to the rain, watching lightning pulse through the curtains, counting the seconds. The thunder kept coming wrong. Too soon sometimes, not at all others, as if the storm were following rules I didn't understand. Morning came calm and ordinary. Small branches lay scattered across the yard, and the ground was soft and dark with water. But the air smelled wrong, not the clean ozone smell of recent lightning, but something else. Something electrical and slightly burnt, the way a shorted circuit smells. And the trees at the back of my yard were bent. Not broken, not split by wind or damaged by anything I could name. Their tops were all leaning in the same direction, a uniform outward tilt, as though a single mass of pressure had moved through them from directly above. I walked to the nearest one and ran my palm up the bark. No burns, no splits, just a lean that looked, the longer I studied it, deeply, fundamentally unnatural. That evening I spoke to my neighbor Ed, a man in his 70s who'd lived on this street longer than anyone. I asked him about the storm. He said it was quite a light show, asked if I had lost power. When I pushed, had he noticed anything unusual, he thought about it for a moment, staring into the middle distance the way he does when he's being careful with words. Well, he said finally, the thunder sounded funny, like it was coming from one direction only. Seemed off. That was all. He hadn't seen anything above the tree line. He didn't mention the stillness, or the shape, or the hum. A few days later, I searched online for storm reports from that night. I found a handful of local posts, mentions of strange flashes, unusual cloud formations, one person asking if anyone else had heard a hum that seemed to come from the wrong direction. No news coverage. No official explanation. For the rest of that week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. Something that had used the storm as cover, or perhaps the storm had gathered around it the way weather gathers around an obstacle. I found myself standing at the back door every time clouds rolled in, watching for lightning, scanning the underside of the sky. 2 weeks later, another storm came through, smaller, less dramatic. I sat on the porch again, half hoping, half dreading. Around 10:30, a flash lit the sky, and for an instant, faint but unmistakable, I thought I saw the same outline, farther away this time, higher, maybe behind the next ridge. Just a shadow against the clouds, there for a single frame of lightning and then gone. No thunder followed, and as I sat there staring into the dark, the low hum returned, soft, almost below the threshold of hearing, lasting 5 or 6 seconds before it faded entirely. The crickets had gone quiet again. I stayed outside for another hour, watching. It never came back. But now, every time lightning illuminates a horizon, I catch myself studying the shapes it reveals in the clouds, scanning for something large and still and patient, hiding in the dark above the tree line, waiting for the next flash to give it away. It was mid-September, around 10 at night. The air had finally turned just cool enough to sit outside in a hoodie without being eaten alive by mosquitoes, and I was on the back porch with a beer, listening to the crickets and the distant white noise of Route 22. My property backs up to a small wooded patch that slopes down to a creek. Beyond that, there's nothing but more trees and a handful of houses half a mile away. I was scrolling through my phone when the corner of my eye caught something in the woods. A faint blue light, low to the ground, maybe 50 yards past the tree line. My first thought was a neighbor's motion lamp, but it was too deep in the trees for that, and it wasn't steady. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, almost deliberate, like a heartbeat rendered in light. I set my phone down and leaned forward. The glow faded, held in darkness for a few seconds, then returned, soft, bluish-white, and oddly even, as though it had been carefully calibrated. It lit the undersides of branches from below, which told me it was sitting close to the ground. I watched it for a full minute, running through explanations. Kids with glow sticks, a phone screen, a drone hovering low. None of them fit. The color was too pure, too clean. The pulse was too regular, too measured, like a second hand on a very slow clock. Then I stood up to get a better look. The light went out, not gradually, not flickering, just off, as though it had been watching me too, and decided our moment of mutual observation was over. I sat back down and tried to convince myself it was a reflection, some trick of the neighbor's security lights traveling sideways through the trees. I almost managed it. Then, 10 minutes later, it came back, fainter this time, and farther to the right, deeper in the trees, the same color, the same slow pulse. I retrieved my flashlight from inside and aimed it toward the woods. The beam barely reached, catching fragments of bark and leaf. When I switched it off, the glow was gone again. I waited. It returned, but not where it had been. It had moved roughly 20 feet to the left, the same distance back. Unmistakably relocated. That's when the unease settled in for real. I put on my boots, not planning to go deep into the woods, just to the edge, where the grass meets the first trees. But the moment I stepped off the porch, the light faded. I froze, waited, took a few more steps, crunched through dry grass. The woods ahead were pure shadow, and I could hear the creek trickling somewhere below. And that was all. I turned to head back. The glow was on the porch, right where I'd been sitting. I stood very still, trying to convince myself my eyes were adjusting badly to the dark. But it was there, a soft, steady pulse, coming from the space I'd just vacated. It vanished when I took a few steps toward it. I stood in the yard for a long time after that, watching nothing, listening to the silence where crickets should have been. I went inside and locked the back door. From my bedroom window, I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the yard and the upper edge of the woods. The glow was there again, halfway between the porch and the creek, just visible through the darkness, pulsing at the same slow rhythm. I stared at it for what felt like several minutes, expecting it to move. It didn't. I finally went to bed. I didn't sleep well. The next morning I walked down to where I thought it had been. The grass was wet, unmarked. No footprints, no tire tracks. Under the trees, the ground looked normal except for a small patch of flattened leaves near the creek bank, casual enough that I might not have noticed it on any other morning. No scorch marks, no debris, nothing that glowed in daylight. It came back the following night. Same time, just after 10. Same place, same pulsing blue-white, low to the ground. But this time I stayed still long enough to notice something that made my skin crawl slowly upward. The pulse had a pattern. 2 quick beats, then 1 longer. A pause. 2 quick beats, 1 long. Repeating, precise, like a signal. I watched it for nearly a minute before I heard something move in the trees. Not footsteps, but a single heavy shift, like a large branch bending under significant weight. I held my breath. The woods went silent. When the glow returned, it was higher, 6 or 7 feet off the ground. Hovering there, pulsing slowly, steady, and this is a word that kept forcing itself into my mind, calm, as though whatever held it had all the patience in the world. It was when I noticed a reflection in my glass door that I finally broke. My own silhouette in the dark glass, and behind it, just barely visible, a faint blue shimmer, diffused, like light filtered through heavy fog, closer than it had any right to be. I went inside, locked both doors, turned off all the lights, and sat in my living room listening to the silence. The power flickered once, just for a second, lamps dimming and recovering. My Wi-Fi dropped. When I checked the back window again, the glow was gone. The next morning, the backyard smelled faintly metallic, like lightning, but without the rain. 3 days later, I woke at 3 a.m. and found the glow again through the bedroom window, steady this time, not pulsing, farther back toward the creek. I watched it for a long time. Then it began to fade, slowly, as though it was sinking into the earth, like it had somewhere underground to be. A week of quiet followed. Then one morning, I found a circle in the grass near the tree line, 10 feet across, the blades pressed flat as if something heavy had rested there. In the center, the soil was slightly darker, slightly damp, though it hadn't rained in days. Every time I walked close to the center of that circle, my phone's flashlight flickered. Once, the screen froze completely before catching up. By evening, the grass had already begun to lift, springing back as though it had simply forgotten what had pressed it down. That night, around 10:30, I saw a faint bluish flicker near the same spot. Not a full glow, more like something trying to push through from the other side of a wall. 2 pulses, then nothing. That was the last time. Now when I sit on the porch, when I sit there at all, which is less often than it used to be, I sometimes think I catch a shimmer in the trees. But it's probably fireflies, or headlights bleeding through from the road. The woods are quiet now, just a creak, just the ordinary sounds of autumn moving in. Still, if I leave my phone on the porch table and catch the reflection in the glass door at the right angle, there's sometimes a faint blue tint in the reflection, almost invisible, gone the instant I move. I tell myself it's a screen. The porch light, something ordinary, but I've stopped sitting out there after dark. I was driving back from my cousin's place in Spencer County, close to midnight, later than I'd meant to stay. The route home winds through farmland, long, empty stretches of 2-lane road with no street lights, no traffic, just fields pressing in from both sides and the kind of deep rural quiet that makes your ears ring. I had the radio on low, mostly for company, and I remember glancing at the dashboard clock, 11:52, maybe 15 minutes from home. My headlights were the only things breaking the dark. That's when they dimmed, not flickered, not stuttered. They simply faded, pulling back to a dull, sick yellow, weak as candles in a jar. My first thought was the alternator, but the engine ran smoothly. No warning lights, nothing. I switched the radio off, then back on. Everything worked fine. The headlights just stayed dim, and the air, I noticed it then, felt heavy, not humid. Heavy, the specific oppressive weight that arrives before a major thunderstorm, except the sky above me was clear and full of stars. Then every light in the valley below me pulsed at once. Not scattered, not sequential. Every farmhouse porch lamp, every barn light, the distant smear of a gas station sign, all of them flickered in perfect unison, a single synchronized heartbeat of light, and then everything was normal again. My headlight snapped back to full brightness in the same instant. I pulled onto the shoulder and stepped out. The night was extraordinary in its stillness. I could hear cattle somewhere far off in the dark. The valley below looked peaceful, nothing out of place, no smoke, no movement. But my hands were trembling slightly as I got back in the car. 2 miles later, it happened again. Headlights dimming first, then the radio popping with static before a high, clean tone came through the speakers. Steady, like a weather alert test signal, lasting 3 seconds and cutting off clean. Immediately after, a light flashed in the valley. Not lightning. Far too white, too focused. Like someone had briefly switched on a stadium's floodlight behind the tree line at the base of the hills. It lasted less than a second. Then a smaller light began moving just above the treetops, drifting parallel to my position. Smooth, silent, following no road, obeying no physics I recognized. I stopped the car and killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insects, no hum from the cooling engine. Just a thick, pressing stillness from every direction. The drifting light slowed and began to hover, pale, steady, the color of cold moonlight on aluminum. I leaned across the seat, pressing my face toward the passenger window, looking for wires, for a suspended cable, for any explanation at all. Nothing. Just the light, moving against the black tree line with a fluid, patient grace. Then all the valley lights blinked off and on again, synchronized, instantaneous, and when they came back, the drifting light was gone. I sat there gripping the steering wheel for a long moment before driving on. The road climbed higher, giving me a clear view of the valley below, and I kept watching. Half a mile later, I spotted something at the far end, a contained glow hovering just above the river bend. Not the scattered warmth of light pollution. Too uniform, too deliberate, like fog lit from within by a source that left no shadows and reflected off nothing. It was simply there, detached from everything below it, as though it belonged to a different layer of reality than the farmland and the water. I pulled over and rolled down the window. The air smelled sharply of ozone. I killed the engine and listened. The usual night sounds were gone. No frogs, no insects, nothing moving in the grass. Then, from the direction of the glow, I heard it, a deep, slow humming. Not mechanical, not produced by any machine I'd ever heard. It was steady and low frequency, resonating not through the air but through my sternum, as though my chest cavity were the instrument it had chosen. It lasted 5 or 6 seconds, and when it stopped, the glow dimmed, one side contracting faster than the other, as though something enormous were rotating slowly away. Then it was gone, leaving only the moonlit fields. I sat there for a while, not moving. When I finally started the car, the radio came on by itself, volume high, playing that same clear, unbroken tone. Then static. My headlights flickered once as I hit the next stretch of road, and steadied. At the highway junction, the clock on my dash read 12:43. I'd been parked on that shoulder for what felt like 10 minutes. The drive from that point should have taken me at least 20 more. The math didn't work. I checked my phone. 12:43. The time felt short for everything that had happened. Not lost time so much as compressed time, squeezed in by something I couldn't name. I got home and sat in my driveway with the engine running. The air outside smelled faintly of rain, though the week had been bone dry, and through the soles of my feet, pressed against the floorboards, I felt a faint vibration, as though the ground itself were humming quietly beneath my wheels. It stopped after a few seconds. The next day, driving back out to meet a friend, I passed a stretch of valley road. It looked ordinary, except that a line of trees near the base of the hill was bent outward, not broken, not burned, just tilted, all in the same direction, as though something very large had passed through from directly above and left only the trees leaning slightly to remember it by. I've driven through that valley many times since. Sometimes, late at night, my headlights dip for just a fraction of a second, and I catch myself looking down at the fields, half expecting every light down there to pulse once in unison, to remind me that whatever moved through that valley is still moving, still breathing, still measuring the distance between its world and mine. It was around 9 on a Sunday night when my phone rang. I was half asleep on the couch, some show playing low on the TV, in that pleasantly mindless state where you're technically watching but not actually seeing. It was Erin, a friend who lives a few blocks over, and her voice had a quality I'd never heard from her before. Not afraid, exactly. More like she was being careful with her words. "Are you home right now?" she asked. "Yeah." "Why?" "There's something above your street. A light. It's just hovering there." I sat up. "What kind of light?" "I don't know. It's not moving, but it's not right. Just go outside and look. You'll see it." She hung up before I could ask more. I figured there was a decent chance she was messing with me. She and her husband had been at a barbecue earlier, but curiosity got the better of doubt. I put on shoes and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool for late August. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The street was empty, peaceful, just a few porch lights glowing down the block. I looked up. Nothing. No hovering light. No unusual brightness in the sky. I walked to the end of my driveway and scanned the whole arc of the visible sky. Stars, the dull orange haze of the city to the east. Nothing hovering. Then I noticed the leaves. About 20 feet down the road, in the middle of the asphalt, a collection of dry autumn leaves, brittle, brown, the kind that crumble when you step on them, was moving in a perfect cycle, counterclockwise, steady and smooth, maintaining a tight, flawless ring perhaps 3 feet across. But there was no wind. I held out my hand. Nothing moved against my palm, not even a breath. Yet the leaves toned, silently, in their perfect formation. That was what stopped me cold. Not the motion, but the silence. They were scraping across asphalt, and they made no sound at all. No rustle, no drag, no papery crackling. Just a circle of leaves turning in silence on a windless street. I called Erin back. She picked up immediately. "I don't see the light," I told her. "But there's something strange in the road." "Wait, it's gone now." It was huge, like a floodlight above your street. I could see it from my window. It was just there, hovering. Then it blinked out. That's why I called. I crouched near the curb and studied the circle. It maintained its perfect shape, its perfect speed. A few leaves drifted briefly upward, as though caught by a thermal, though no air moved. When I opened my phone camera to record it, the screen flickered. The image froze. Then the whole phone restarted. When the screen came back up, the leaves were still spinning, but slower, and the circle was tightening, leaves drawing inward toward a central point like a slow-motion spiral collapsing into itself. Then, all at once, every leaf dropped flat to the pavement. The silence broke. Crickets. A dog barking somewhere down the block. I stepped forward and nudged one of the leaves with my shoe. Dry. Brittle. Ordinary. Aaron texted a few minutes later. It's back. I ran out the front door. This time no circle. But above the trees, roughly 100 feet up, a bluish-white light hung in the air, perfectly still. Not a drone. Not a plane. It didn't flicker. Didn't strobe. It was simply there, like light that had forgotten it needed a source to justify its existence. A spotlight aimed into thin air, illuminating nothing. I watched it for perhaps 10 seconds. Then it was gone. No fade. No movement. Just the absence where it had been. When I looked back at the street, the circle of leaves had returned, but not in the same spot. It was 10 feet closer to my house, spinning in the same patient, counterclockwise pattern. The air pressure changed. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift, the kind you feel in your sinuses when altitude changes. My ears popped slightly. I took a step backward. The circle slowed. I stepped forward. It sped up. I stood very still and watched it for a long moment, my mind assembling something I didn't want to assemble. The circle wasn't just turning in place. It was drifting, inch by inch, at the same slow pace as a leaf's rotation, moving toward me along the road. I backed up, keeping the same distance, watching it advance. I made it all the way back to my porch before it reached the curb and simply stopped. No sound, no light, nothing. The leaves dropped flat, scattered as a release from a hand, and lay still. I didn't sleep well. The next morning I went out early and found the leaves still there, but damp, as though dew had settled more heavily on them than on everything else nearby. When I brushed them aside, the asphalt underneath was lighter, a pale ring, almost waxy to the touch, where the circle had been. I took a photograph. When I looked at the photo later, the ring was gone. The asphalt appeared perfectly uniform. Normal. That evening Erin came to see the spot herself. The color difference had faded, but she stood where I showed her and looked up at the trees overhead, the same trees above which she'd seen the light. That's exactly where it was, she said quietly. Right above the spot. It was bright enough that I could see your driveway from my window. We stood there for a while without saying much. A couple of cars passed. Their headlights swept across the asphalt and everything looked ordinary. Then we both heard it at the same time, a faint scraping sound, like dry leaves dragging across pavement, coming from farther down the road. We turned. Nothing visible at first. Then, under the next street light, maybe 50 feet away, another small cluster of leaves was turning in a slow, deliberate circle. We didn't go closer. We watched from my driveway as the circle tightened, sped up slightly, then, all at once, froze. Every leaf dropped simultaneously. Aaron backed toward my porch. Let's go inside. 3 days later, backing out of my driveway in the morning, my dashboard lights flickered, and at the corner of the intersection, in the clear morning light, a small spiral of leaves turned in place. Silent, perfect, patient. I watched it until it stopped. Then I drove to work. Since then, I've seen smaller versions. In the park, along sidewalks, once in the center of an empty parking lot. Always silent, always perfectly circular. They never last long, and no one else seems to notice them. I don't tell people anymore. I just watch until they stop, but the smell stays afterward. Every time. A sharp, hot metal odor, like heated dust on iron. It fades quickly, but once you've cataloged it, it's impossible to ignore. Last night I stepped outside to get the mail. The street was empty and still. In the middle of the road, a single dry leaf was spinning slowly in place. Just one leaf. No wind. I watched it for a moment, then went back inside and locked the door. It was a red-eye from Seattle to Chicago, mid-February, the kind of flight where half the cabin is unconscious before the wheels leave the ground. I'd been in Seattle for work and needed to be back for an early meeting, so I booked the cheapest seat I could find. 25B, middle seat in the center block. The flight left around 11:40 p.m., and the cabin lights dimmed almost immediately after takeoff. I couldn't sleep. I never can on planes, so I scrolled through emails and read things I'd saved weeks ago and forgot about. Ordinary restless travel. About 40 minutes in, I stretched sideways and glanced past a guy in 25A, a young guy, hoodie up, headphones in, deeply asleep with his window shade half open. I could see the faint glow of the wing lights against the dark and the usual black void of high-altitude night. That's when I noticed it. Something below us, slightly to the right. A dull white glow, maybe a few thousand feet down. At first I told myself it was another aircraft, passenger jet share corridors, and you occasionally see them. But it wasn't flashing. No strobes, no red and green navigational lights. Just a smooth, constant glow, as though whatever produced it were lit from within. And as I watched, I understood it was moving in precise synchronization with us. Every subtle banking adjustment, every minor course correction our plane made, the thing below made simultaneously. Not a second behind. Not an approximation of our movement. A perfect, instantaneous mirror. I waited for it to drift away. It didn't. I leaned closer to the half-open window, squinting past the cabin's reflection, and got a better look at its shape. Oval, or perhaps teardrop shaped from above, with no wings, no tail, no protrusions of any kind. Just a smooth, faintly luminous form keeping pace with a commercial aircraft traveling at 500 miles per hour. When the captain came on to announce a slight course adjustment for weather, the plane turned. The light below turned with it. Not a fraction of a second delayed, not close but not quite. Exactly with us. I nudged the man in 25A. He lifted the shade fully and went back to sleep. I pressed my face close to the glass. We were over Montana by then. Miles of unlit wilderness, no towns below, nothing but the shape of that object gliding beneath us in the dark. When we hit turbulence, small jolts, the kind that rattle coffee cups, our plane bumped and shuddered. The thing below moved smooth as water. The seatbelt sign came on. The captain's voice came through about unexpected crosswinds, and the engines deepened as we climbed. The object below climbed with us, maintaining the same altitude differential, the same horizontal distance. I felt something in my gut that had nothing to do with turbulence. I watched it for what must have been 20 minutes. The longer I looked, the less certain I was about its scale. Sometimes it seemed far away. Sometimes it seemed close enough that I should have been able to make out surface details, and the fact that I couldn't, that it remained a simple, smooth ovoid of pale light, made it somehow worse. Then everything outside the window went completely black. Not cloud-covered dark, not moonless dark, absolute dark, as if a curtain had been drawn across the universe for exactly 2 seconds. When visibility returned, the light was gone. I blinked repeatedly and leaned as close to the glass as the seat would allow. Stars, the red pulse of our wingtip light. Nothing else. 5 minutes later, a flicker far to the left. Smaller, moving fast, zipping parallel to us for a few seconds before slowing and matching our speed again. And now the cabin felt different. The engine noise seemed dampened, slightly muffled, as though something were absorbing acoustic energy from the air around us. My ears popped. Nobody around me stirred. The light drifted closer, angling beneath our wing. I strained to keep it in view, noticing something important. It wasn't illuminating the wing. There was no reflection on the metal, no cast glow on the engine housing or the flap assemblies. It was light that didn't interact with anything around it, as though it existed in a layer of reality slightly offset from ours, visible but untouchable. The engine made a low, resonant sound, not mechanical distress, but a shift in harmonic, like a note-changing pitch. The pressure inside the cabin altered subtly. What the hell is that? The man in 25A was awake. He was staring out the window, body rigid, face close to the glass. I said, "You see it too?" He nodded slowly. We both watched in silence as the light drifted upward until it was nearly level with our wing, just there, pulsing very slowly, smooth and white and inexplicable. Then the cabin lights flickered. Half a second of darkness throughout the entire plane. When they came back on, the light was gone. The man in 25A said nothing. After a moment, he pulled the shade down and sat there staring at the seat back in front of him, his jaw set. We didn't speak for the rest of the flight. I stayed awake watching through the gap at the edge of his window shade. Didn't see it again until we began our descent toward Chicago. Lower now, Clouds beneath us, the scattered lights of small towns starting to appear through the gaps. As the plane banked to align with the runway, I caught a glimpse of the glow again, above us this time, faint and distant, moving in the opposite direction. Nobody reacted. It was gone before I could have said anything anyway. I landed feeling hollowed out. Checked flight radar that morning. The airspace below our track had been empty at that time. No military exercises logged. No unusual activity noted. 3 weeks later, on a flight from Denver to Atlanta, I saw it again. Same dull white glow, same patient pace. Much farther away this time. It kept pace with us for about 5 minutes, then faded out slowly, the only time it's ever done that, dimming like someone turning a rheostat. I've flown several times since. I always book the window seat. I always watch the dark below during turns, in those moments when the wing tilts and gives you a sudden angle of the sky beneath. So far, nothing. But in those seconds of tilted visibility, the dark coming into view, I still feel my stomach drop slightly before my eyes adjust, bracing for what might be there. Patient and pale and keeping perfect pace, a mirror image of our path through the sky, following every move we make and casting no light on anything it touches. I woke up thinking the power had gone out overnight. My alarm clock was blinking 12, the universal signal of a reset, the small domestic marker of a disrupted night. I reached for my phone to check the time. It said 4:52 a.m. Early, but manageable. I'd reset the clock and go back to sleep. In the kitchen, pouring water, I glanced at the microwave. 4:56. I stopped, looked at my phone again. Still 4:52. Looked at the stove clock. 4:48. My pulse quickened. Not panic, but that specific nervous alertness that arrives when something is wrong and your brain is running fast to find a reason. The wall clock in the living room said 4:44. 4 clocks, 4 different times, each one exactly 4 minutes apart from the next. I actually laughed, a short, uncertain laugh, the kind you produce when the alternative is something more difficult to manage. But it wasn't funny. My phone had full service. Auto time was enabled. The Wi-Fi router showed steady green lights, no sign of a reset, no interruption. My laptop said 4:40. The world clock website confirmed my phone's time. My old Casio watch by the door said 4:48, matching the stove exactly. Every clock in the house was running at a different time, and they were separated by exactly 4 minutes each. 4:44, 4:48, 4:52, 4:56. Too precise, too systematic to be coincidence. Not random drift, not a power surge scrambling digital displays chaotically. A sequence, an interval, something that moved through my house at exactly 4-minute intervals and touched each clock individually. I was standing in the kitchen, working through this, when something hit wet grass outside. Not loud, a soft, dull thump. I turned off the kitchen light and looked out the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could see the backyard imperfectly, just shapes and reflections. Then I saw the light. Near the shed, a faint white glow, low to the ground. Not yellow like my neighbor's motion lamp, but flat, characterless, as though it didn't quite understand how light was supposed to work. It wasn't illuminating anything around it. It just was, hanging there in the mist about 20 feet from the door. I stood watching it, not moving, for several minutes. The microwave beeped. I spun around. It had reset itself to blinking 12. A moment later, the stove did the same. In the living room, the wall clock had stopped entirely. I checked my phone, still 4:52, unchanged. When I looked out the window again, the light was gone. I went outside with an umbrella, feeling slightly ridiculous. The grass was soaked and cold. The shed door was slightly open, and I always latch it. I shone my flashlight around the shed's exterior. No cables, nothing glowing, no sign of any electrical source. Just wet wood and the sound of rain on the umbrella's fabric. And then, from above, not from the shed, not from anywhere I could locate, a hum. Low, steady, omnidirectional, as though the air itself were vibrating at a frequency just below what my hearing could cleanly resolve. I tilted my head back. Thick clouds, the orange underglow of the neighborhood at night, nothing visible. The hum wasn't directional. It simply filled the space around me. After perhaps a minute, it stopped, not faded, stopped, I went back inside. Every digital clock in the house was blank. Not blinking, not displaying any time. Just dark, dead screens, while the lights worked perfectly and the refrigerator ran and every other electrical appliance functioned normally. I sat on the couch and waited. At 5:16, according to my phone, I realized I'd been sitting there for what felt like only a few minutes, though I couldn't account for the gap. I tried to call my friend Alex, who works nights. The call wouldn't connect. A fast, busy signal, the kind I hadn't heard in years, as though the line itself didn't exist. I tried again. Same thing. When I texted instead, the message sat in a sending loop for 10 minutes before delivering, along with 3 old notifications from early in the day, all arriving simultaneously, as though they'd been held somewhere and released at once. Eventually, every clock in the house came back on. Together, all at once, all showing 5:48 a.m. exactly. By sunrise, the world had reassembled itself into something I could nearly believe was ordinary. I checked the shed. No damage, no burn marks, no footprints. Only the latch, slightly bent, as though it had been pulled from the outside by something that understood the mechanism but applied too much force. I reset every clock manually. They've kept perfect time since. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake and make my circuit. Bedroom clock, phone, stove, microwave, living room. I don't expect to find them wrong. I check anyway, because the feeling that morning, that first moment of waking and reaching for my phone and understanding that time did not agree with itself, has never entirely left me. It lives in the part of the mind that runs quietly beneath everything else. Patient and precise, keeping its own 4-minute interval. I was hiking alone in northeastern Oregon, in the Eagle-Cap Wilderness, on a mid-October morning with that particular quality of alpine silence that makes your footsteps sound intrusive and your breathing too loud. I'd started before sunrise from the Two-Pan trailhead, planning to reach a small alpine lake I'd camped at once before. The air had that sharp, dry smell that precedes snow season, a mineral clarity that makes everything feel properly cold and clean. By the time I was a few miles in, I'd stopped noticing my surroundings consciously and let my mind drift the way it does on long solo hikes, a pleasant, half-attentive float. Around 11, thin clouds began crossing the peaks, flattening the light to a uniform gray. I noticed it because that's when the world started to feel subtly wrong. Not in any obvious way, just still. No birds, no chipmunk chatter, not even the small sounds of movement in the underbrush. The quiet felt muffled, like a sound-dampening material had been applied to the forest. I left the main trail about 30 minutes later, following what looked like a game trail that curved through thick lodgepole pine toward a visible gap in the canopy. The trees opened into a clearing. It stopped me immediately. The clearing was circular, precisely, perfectly circular, roughly 50 yards across. The ground was rocky, with patches of grass and moss, but what was absent was as striking as what was present. No fallen branches, no deadwood, none of the organic scatter that accumulates in any natural forest opening. Everything within the circle's boundary was clean. I stepped in and felt the temperature drop immediately, not the gradual cooling of shade, but a sudden, marked cold, as though the air inside the circle had been refrigerated separately from everything around it. I looked up. Every tree around the clearing's circumference had the same damage, bark and branches intact up to perhaps 30 feet. Then, nothing. From 30 feet upward, the trunks were stripped bare and slightly scorched, the wood darkened and smooth, as though something had burned or melted or simply removed everything above that elevation. Not a single branch, not a tuft of bark. And the damage was perfectly uniform, the same height, the same condition, all the way around the cycle. Lightning could have hit one tree. It couldn't have done this to every tree, at the same height, in a perfect radius. I crouched and pressed my palm to the soil, cold like refrigerated metal. I checked my pack small thermometer, 52 degrees. The ground felt at least 20 degrees colder than that. I stayed perhaps a minute, crouched in the center of that clearing, when the sound, or rather the absence of sound, became total. Not just quiet, not just still, an actual silence, the kind that makes you suddenly aware that you can't hear your own breathing echoing off anything. Like the air had stopped participating. And then the forest edge shimmered. Just for a second, a subtle visual distortion, like heat haze rising off summer asphalt, running along the entire circumference of the tree line. One full second, and then gone. The air remained cold. The light didn't change. But I felt, and I know how this sounds, I felt that something had changed, that a state had altered, that a process had concluded or begun, and the shimmer was simply the visible edge of it. I stood up fast and back toward the edge of the circle. The moment I crossed the boundary of stripped trees, the temperature normalized completely. I turned to look one more time. The smell hit me. Ozone. Sharp, metallic, electric. No storm had passed. The sky had been still and overcast all day. But the smell was unmistakable, the same smell that lingers after a lightning strike, when the air is still trembling with discharged electricity. I walked quickly. I didn't run, but I put distance between myself and that clearing as efficiently as I could. 10 minutes later, I found the pine needles. They were all pointing the same direction, not scattered by wind, not lying randomly as gravity would arrange them. They were aligned east-west, precisely parallel, as though magnetized. I tested one with my knife tip. It lifted easily from the surface. The rest held in place, stuck to the ground in their arrangement. I left them alone and kept moving. My GPS flickered once as I pulled it out to check my heading. Just a brief blink. It came back immediately and worked fine. I found the main trail and made my way back to the trailhead. The whole time, I felt watched. Not in a paranoid way. I'm a veteran solo hiker, and I know the difference between the natural self-consciousness of being alone in wilderness and something external. This was external. Something at the edge of my peripheral vision that stopped being there every time I turned to check. At the trailhead, mine was the only vehicle. I opened the trunk to drop my pack in, and noticed my watch had stopped. 12:37 p.m. My phone said 10:04 p.m. I sat in the car for a long time before starting the engine. My hands weren't trembling from cold. On the drive out, the radio picked up a pulsing tone, not static, but rhythmic and deliberate, like something breathing through a speaker. It lasted 15 seconds and cut out cleanly. I turned the radio off. When I got home and reviewed my GPS track, the route was all there, except for a gap of approximately 10 minutes centered exactly on my time in the clearing. The track froze in one position and then resumed on the opposite side of the clearing's location, as though I had teleported from one side to the other, or as though something had prevented the device from recording what occurred in between. A few weeks later, I went back with my friend Nate. We followed the same recorded track. Where the clearing should have been, there was only continuous, unbroken forest, no circular opening, no stripped trees, no temperature drop. The forest looked normal. Unremarkably, almost aggressively normal, as though it had always been that way and couldn't imagine why you might suggest otherwise. That night, I replaced the battery in my watch. When I set the time, I noticed the hands were stopped at 12:37, exactly where they'd frozen on the trail. The old battery looked fine when I took it out. No corrosion, no damage. I put in the new battery and it started running immediately, but the time it displayed was 12:37. Exactly where it had stopped? I don't know what exists in that clearing, whether it still exists, whether the clearing itself still exists in the way that places are supposed to. I don't know what the GPS couldn't record, or what the temperature was at the center of that depression in the ground, or what the shimmering at the tree line meant. I know the ozone smell. I know the cold. I know the silence that is not silence, but the absence of every sound that should be there. And sometimes, driving through that part of Oregon when the sky is flat and gray and the air tastes of iron, I catch that smell through the car vents. Just briefly. Just enough. I haven't been back up that trail. There were 4 of us camping outside Red Rock Canyon in Nevada. Me, my girlfriend Brooke, and our friends Mason and Kira. A spontaneous trip, poorly planned. The kind where nobody brings quite enough firewood, but the sunset makes up for everything. We drove out on Friday evening, set up tents at a free site outside the park boundary, and sat around a small fire while the sky went through its full desert repertoire of color before settling into something so dark and complete it felt solid. By 11, Brooke and Kira had turned in. Mason and I stayed up talking, and the silence out there was extraordinary, the kind of empty, heavy stillness that makes you aware of your own smallness. You could see for miles in every direction. Nothing but desert and stars. When I finally crawled into the tent, I remember checking the time, 11:47, and thinking Brooke was already asleep. I put my phone on airplane mode and set it in the corner of the tent. I fell asleep faster than I expected. I woke to Brooke whispering my name. Not urgently, just quietly and deliberately, the way you wake someone when you're not sure you should. Eli, wake up. I rolled over. She was holding a phone in front of her face, screen glowing, but she wasn't touching it. The camera was open and recording. I looked at my own phone in the corner of the tent. Its screen had come on by itself. Camera open. Recording. The double beep of two phones entering record mode, in exact sequence, in the dark of a tent in the middle of the Mojave, with the nearest cell tower miles away. From Mason's tent, guys. And from Kira, immediately. Yeah, same. All four of us unzipped and stepped out at nearly the same moment. The wind had stopped entirely, not slowed, not diminished. Stopped. The air was dead still and had gone cold, the specific cold that doesn't come from temperature but from something else, something absent. All four of our phones were recording, their screens lit and pointed upward, and none of us could move them. I tried to swipe the camera view sideways. The image wouldn't shift. It was locked on a single patch of sky, a specific circular area of darkness directly overhead where no stars shone, not obscured by clouds, just empty. A void where the stars stopped. Mason hard reset his phone. It powered back on and went directly to the camera and resumed recording. It's cold, Brooke said. It was. The air around us had dropped noticeably, a sudden chill with no source and no wind to carry it. When I looked down, the sand around my feet was shimmering faintly, a low, barely visible static-like movement, as though the grains were vibrating at the edge of perceptibility. Mason's phone made a sound, not from the speaker, but from the microphone, as though it were capturing a frequency we couldn't hear, a thin, rising and falling tone that was immediately joined by Brooke's phone doing the same. Do you guys see that? Kira whispered. We looked up. The dark patch overhead was no longer just dark. It had texture, a subtle layering, like smoke you could almost see through, and every few seconds a ripple moved through it. Not light, not cloud movement. A ripple in something, in whatever occupied that space above us. Then all four phones stopped recording. Simultaneously. Exactly. Mid-frame, frozen. And then their screens went dark one after another in a cascade that took less than a second. Brooke handed Hayes to me. It wouldn't power on. None of them would. All four phones. Dead. Despite charges ranging from full to 60%. We sat by the dying fire after that and didn't talk much. Mason kept looking up. I kept thinking I saw faint flickers in the same patch of sky, probably lightning over the next range. I told myself. Probably. Around 2 in the morning, Kira's phone came back on. Sluggish. Screen lagging. She opened a gallery and found a new folder, DCIM0. Inside, 2 short videos, both completely black except for a faint pulse of light every few seconds. Slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat visible through fog. The audio track carried a low, steady hum. Not wind, not static, something mechanical in its regularity. The timestamps read 12:03 a.m. for both files, though it had been closer to midnight when everything happened. Mason's phone eventually recovered. Same folder, same 2 videos, same timestamps, same hum. Mine and Brooke showed nothing recoverable, just a small system log entry. Camera active, 004. We didn't sleep again. Mason burned cardboard and food wrappers to keep the fire going, because having light felt necessary in a way we couldn't explain. We broke camp at first light and drove to the nearest town, where the phones charged and the videos were still there. But something had changed about them. The pulse of light was slower. The audio was gone, just silence where the hum had been. Mason transferred the files to his laptop. When he played them back, both videos were blank. The files existed. Their durations were correct, but they contained only darkness. 2 nights later at home, scrolling through my camera roll, I found a system file I didn't recognize. A folder labeled DCIM0 with 1 image inside. A photograph of the night sky taken from ground level, but the stars were wrong. They didn't match the coordinates of our campsite, or any coordinates I could subsequently identify. In the center of the frame, barely visible unless you adjusted the brightness to maximum, was a faint circular blur. Symmetrical. Deliberate. The metadata said it was captured at 12:03 a.m. I showed Brooke. She stared at it for a long time and then asked if she could delete it. I said yes. When she tapped the delete button, the screen froze for a moment. Then the photo deleted itself. A week later, Mason texted, "Kira's phone keeps turning the camera on by itself." He sent a screenshot, the live view, pointing upward from his back porch, at the same dark patch of sky. 2 days after that, it stopped. I checked my own phone that night. No new photos. But when I opened the camera, the lens jerked upward involuntarily, a sharp, seeking movement, as though trying to locate something above me. It lasted less than a second. I closed the app and set the phone face down. We agreed, all four of us, not to talk about it anymore. And mostly we've kept that agreement. But sometimes I'm outside at night, walking the dog, taking out recycling, anything, and I notice a blank patch in the sky where no stars seem to twinkle. A gap in the celestial texture. A dead pixel in the night. I don't point my phone at it. I've learned my lesson about that. I notice it at 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I probably shouldn't have made. The house was quiet. Fridge hum, occasional floorboard creak, the ambient nothing of a house at rest. I'd been unable to sleep and wasn't making much progress on fixing that. The motion light outside my back door clicked on. I looked at the window. The yard was empty. No animal. No movement. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone, a standard Wi-Fi security camera, night vision mode, mounted to cover the backyard. The grainy black and white image showed nothing. Completely empty yard. Then I noticed the timestamp in the corner. It had jumped forward 6 seconds. I stared at it, thinking lag, thinking network glitch. I refreshed the feed. It happened again. Another 6-second skip, instantaneous. The light was on. Something had triggered a motion sensor, but nothing moved in the frame. Not a shadow, not a passing bird, not a drift of leaves. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Light on. Camera showing nothing. Timestamp jumping exactly 6 seconds. I watched the feed for the next hour. In the corner of the yard, I began to notice something. The shadows of the garden furniture were slightly wrong. Not dramatically, just subtly misaligned with the angle of the porch light, as though they were obeying a different light source that wasn't visible in the frame. Third trigger, light on, nothing visible, 6-second skip. But this time I saw the grass. A small arc of blades near the camera's lower corner, bent over in a precise curve, as though something had pressed down on them. By the next frame refresh, they were straight again. I put on my jacket, took my flashlight, and went outside. The air felt charged, tingly against my skin. I swept the beam methodically across every corner of the yard. Nothing. No tracks, no marks, no indication that anything had moved through. When I went back inside and checked the feed, it triggered again, 6-second skip, and at the far edge of the yard, just visible for a single frame refresh, there was a shape. Not human-shaped. Not any shape I could categorize. Just a darker area in the darkness, with edges that were too smooth and too deliberate to be a bush or a fence post, and which was gone so quickly I couldn't be certain it had been there at all. Over the following week, the pattern held. Every time. Light on, blank feed, 6-second skip. Occasionally, not always, the subtle signs, bent grass, misaligned shadows, faint outlines that lasted 1 or 2 frame refreshes before vanishing. I moved the camera to a different angle. Same pattern. I unplugged the motion light. The feed still showed the 6-second skips, as though the timestamp were jumping independently of anything I could control. A month later, a friend visiting for dinner noticed it without being told. We were standing at the back window when the light clicked on and the timestamp jumped at 6 seconds, and, in the frame, a faint outline shimmered at the garden's far edge. She said, "Is that a tree?" I said no. She got quiet. I still don't know what moves through my backyard at night. I don't know whether it can be seen by anyone standing there, or whether it only registers on the camera, whether the camera is capturing something the human eye can't process, or whether the camera is the only instrument sensitive enough to detect whatever this is. What I know is the sequence. Always the same. Motion trigger, blank frame, 6-second skip, and the feeling, which I cannot explain and cannot fully dismiss, that whatever passes through my yard in the night keeps very careful track of time, even when I'm not watching. Even when I'm asleep. Especially then. What follows is not one account. It's all of them. I've read enough of these stories now, told enough of them to myself in quiet moments, turned them over enough times in the dark, to notice what they share, not the specific details. The texture, every account has its silence. The crickets cutting off, the frogs going quiet, the dogs standing still, staring at something the humans can't locate. Every account has its light, pale, sourceless, casting no reflection, illuminating nothing it touches. Every account has its time problem, clocks that don't agree, timestamps that jump, drive that take longer than they should, hikes that lose 10 minutes in a GPS track. Every account has its smell, sharp, metallic, electric, ozone without lightning, the ghost of a storm that wasn't there. I've stopped thinking of these as separate events. Not because I think they're connected in any conventional sense. Not because I believe some coordinated intelligence is watching Springfield and Route 22 and Red Rock Canyon and Eagle Cap Wilderness simultaneously. But because the pattern is consistent in a way that simple coincidence can't account for. Something moves through the world. It moves at night, mostly. It moves in silence that swallows the ordinary sounds of a living landscape. It leaves traces that are almost nothing. Bent grass, a faint circle, a smell that fades, a clock set wrong, and then it corrects those traces, pulling them back toward ordinary, as though it understands that legibility is a problem. It appears to be studying us the way a scientist studies a cell culture. Not with hostility, not with warmth, with the calm, methodical attention of something that has all the time it needs, because it exists in a relationship with time that we can't fully inhabit. Our clocks jump. Our timestamps disagree. Our GPS tracks develop gaps. Because whatever this is doesn't share our experience of duration. It moves through our 4-minute intervals and our 10-minute hikes and our 40-minute drives the way we move through a photograph, present in it, but not of it. The trees bent outward in Springfield. The trees bent outward in Spencer County. Two separate accounts, two separate witnesses, both noting trees bent in the same direction, neither aware of the other. The ozone smell appears in Eagle Cap and Red Rock and along the Oregon coast and in a subdivision by a river and in a backyard where a camera keeps losing 6 seconds. The same smell. The same sharp, clean, impossible after-rain smell that someone once described as like lightning without a storm. The lights have no source. They illuminate nothing they touch. They respond to observation, dimming when you approach, rising when you stand still, as though whoever holds them understands that being looked at changes the interaction. The sounds are always low frequency, always resonant, always described with the same frustrated inadequacy, like breathing, like distant machinery, like something inside the chest instead of in the air. I've been sitting with all of this for a long time now, trying to find a single theory that ties it together, the explanatory framework that makes it coherent. I haven't found one. Maybe there isn't one, not one that fits within the categories of understanding we currently possess. But here's what I believe, sitting here in the early hours of a morning that smells faintly of rain that hasn't arrived yet. We are not alone on this planet in any of the ways that phrase is commonly meant. Not the theological sense, not the extraterrestrial visitation movie sense. Something else. Something that has been here alongside us for longer than we've been tracking these things, moving through the geography of our ordinary world with a patience that suggests it experiences time very differently than we do, that our lifetimes are moments to it, our cities are temporary, our attention is briefly interesting but ultimately beside the point. It is not malevolent. Nothing in any of these accounts describes harm. Nobody is hurt. The dogs are frightened but fine. The electronics recover. The bent grass springs back up. The clocks eventually agree. It is simply present. Present in the storm above Springfield. Present in the woods behind the creek. Present in the valley below the 2-lane road. Present in the sky above the red desert. Present at 3 a.m. in the backyard while the camera jumps at 6-second gap and the shadows bend the wrong direction. And now, having written all of this down, having tried to give it shape and sequence and the dignity of clear language, I notice that the air in my room has changed. There's a smell. Sharp, metallic, electric, like ozone after lightning. But there's been no storm. I'm going to close this document now. I'm going to close my laptop and sit very still in the dark of my house, and I'm going to listen to the silence where the crickets should be. And if I feel my pulse begin to synchronize with something I can't hear, I'm going to remind myself that whatever it is, it's been watching for a very long time. And it has never, not once, in any of these accounts, made the mistake of being fully seen. Until tonight. The light outside my window just went on. The timestamp on this document just jumped forward. 6 seconds. Exactly 6. It was late July, one of those sticky nights when the air clings to your skin like wet fabric and the sky never quite surrenders to full darkness. I lived just outside Springfield, Missouri, on the edge of a quiet neighborhood where the backyards bleed into a ragged patch of woods and open farmland. The only sound most nights is a distant murmur of the highway, maybe a mile off, threading through the dark like a river you can hear but never see. That night, I was sitting on the back porch watching a storm build itself on the horizon. It had been gathering all evening, low, rolling thunder that never quite arrived, and flashes of lightning so far away they barely silvered the fields. The power had flickered twice already, and the smell of ozone was so thick I could taste it on the back of my teeth, metallic and alive. I've always loved storms. Something about the way they announce themselves, the slow, dramatic theater of their approach, has always drawn me outside instead of in. I usually stay on the porch until the rain finally drives me through the door. But this one felt different before it even really started. The first sign was a silence. The crickets cut off mid-chirp, not gradually, not one by one, but all at once, as if someone had reached into the night and unplugged it. The leaves in the trees went perfectly still. Not a single breeze moved through them. Even the low, constant hum from the transformer at the end of the street went quiet. The world seemed to hold its breath, and that silence stretched outward like something enormous pressing down from above. I looked at my phone. 10:42 p.m. I was sitting barefoot on the porch steps, a beer resting on the wood beside me, watching the clouds. They weren't rolling and tumbling the way storm clouds usually do. They were layered, thick, geological almost, with flat, perfectly level bottoms, as though the entire sky had hardened into a single gray ceiling. The lightning started again, distant at first, those silent chain reaction flashes that light the horizon without thunder. And then a bolt struck somewhere close. Close enough that the world went white for half a second. I flinched, the beer wobbled on the step, and in that frozen half-second of total illumination, I saw something. Not a plane, not a cloud formation, not anything my brain could immediately file away under natural phenomena. It was enormous. It sat just above the tree line, half swallowed by the lowest layer of clouds, and it had structure, hard, straight edges, what looked like flat geometric planes catching the lightning the way sheet metal catches light. It wasn't glowing. It wasn't lit from within. It was simply there, massive and dark and utterly still, revealed for a single heartbeat by the lightning and then swallowed again by darkness. I told myself it was afterimage. Lightning does strange things to your vision. It burns shapes onto your retinas that linger for seconds afterward. I told myself this firmly, convincingly, the way you talk yourself down from a ledge you didn't mean to climb. Then the next bolt came. Same spot, same shape. But this time it had shifted, not moved away, not fled, but tilted slightly, the way a ship adjusts its angle against a wave. I stood up without deciding to. My beer tipped off the step, and I didn't reach for it. The thunder came, but it felt delayed, as though the sound were traveling from much farther away than the lightning suggested. I walked off the porch and into the yard, my bare feet pressing into wet grass, my eyes locked on the patch of sky where it had appeared. Another flash, brighter, closer, and there it was again, massive, dark, curved along one edge but squared off on the other, like nothing in nature and nothing in any catalog of aircraft I'd ever seen. It wasn't lit. The lightning had simply outlined it, the way a photographer's flash reveals what darkness hides. Then the rain came, sudden and violent, sheets of it hammering the yard, and I sprinted back to the porch and stood under the awning, soaking wet and breathing hard. The wind arrived in sharp, uneven bursts, not gusting naturally the way wind does, but pushing in aggressive, mechanical pulses, as though something were displacing air above. And then I noticed something that hollowed me out completely. There was no thunder following the lightning anymore. None. Just silence and rain, flash and stillness. No crack, no roll, no reverberation through the ground. I stood there for 5 minutes, watching, waiting, counting the seconds after each flash. Nothing. The lightning kept flashing to the east, but the thunder was either arriving wrong or not arriving at all. Around 11 o'clock, the rain slowed. The storm seemed to drift, moving east, and I was nearly ready to go inside when one final bolt struck, and in that white instant, I saw it directly overhead, not at the tree line, not at the edge of the neighborhood, above my yard. It filled the entire patch of sky I could see. I could make out its underside through the thin lower clouds, or rather, the shadow of its underside, the suggestion of something vast and absolutely motionless hanging above my home. The edges were sharp. There were no lights, no exhaust, no markings, no sound. Just the impression of something incalculably large suspended in the air above me, as patient and still as a hell breath. Then it was gone. I ran inside, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame, and stood in the kitchen with my back against the wall, breathing like I'd sprinted a mile. My hand was shaking. I could feel my pulse in my neck, in my temples, in my fingertips. I told myself to think rationally. Storm cloud can form unusual shapes. Lightning distort perception. Fatigue makes the mind reach for patterns. But when I made myself look out the window again, I saw something that stripped every rational explanation I'd been assembling. The clouds above my house had stopped moving. Not slowed. Stopped. Perfectly still, while the rest of the storm churned and rolled to the east, like someone had pressed pause on a small, specific circle of sky directly overhead. It stayed that way for nearly a full minute.